Bildungsroman. In this PowerPoint presentation, we shall discuss the subgenre of the novel, Bildungsroman. Let us first discuss what are the characteristics or features of a Bildungsroman. From the word itself, we can understand that it is not an English term. Instead, it is a German term which was coined by the philologist Karl Morgenstern in 1819, which means early 19th century. If you look at the meaning of this German term, Bildungsroman, it literally means formation novel. It is also known as the novel of education or the novel of formation. And it is also referred to as the coming of age novel. Why Bildungsroman is also called the novel of education or the novel of formation would make us think about the purpose that this novel, this kind of novel, serves. When we look at the phrase, a novel of education, so it naturally implies that it must have the purpose of educating someone, or it may also imply that it leads to the formation of something. And this formation of something is nothing but the formation of a character, or let's say the transformation of a character who undergoes several stages in his life, which finally leads to his transformation as well as formation. It is also referred to as the coming of age novel because the protagonist who is dealt with in this particular subgenre seems to mature with time, seems to attain much development as time passes by. So, when we refer to Bildungsroman as the coming of age novel, it means someone, or let's say an individual, who comes out of his age and develops and attains maturity. Bildungsroman generally revolves around the psychological and moral growth of the protagonist from childhood to maturity. So as I mentioned just now, that how does it lead to the formation of a character, or how does it educate a character? So when we read a Bildungsroman novel, we find that the entire plot revolves, as well as the events, they revolve around the psychological and moral growth of the protagonist from childhood to maturity. The person, the character that we come across when he or she is in his childhood is no longer the same when he reaches a mature state, which means that it involves his moral growth as well as his psychological growth. It deals with the growth of a sensitive person seeking answers to his questions through different experiences. As far as the protagonist of this novel is concerned, we find that he's a kind of sensitive person because unless the character is a sensitive person, it is not possible to undergo psychological transformation or moral growth. So what he does, he goes through different varied experiences in his life, and through these experiences he gains knowledge which leads to his education, which educates him morally as well as helps to mature his psychological state as well. So he tries to find answers to his questions, to the several questions that emerge in his mind. And these experiences that the protagonist goes through help him attain maturity. In this subgenre, the protagonist goes in search of the meaning of life and his place in society. Yes, it's quite natural because as he's undergoing a process of transformation, he goes he goes out, he encounters the outside world, the outer world, in order to understand the meaning of his life, and he also tries to find out his own position in society, where he belongs to. Because we find that the protagonist is always in a state of conflict with the values of society. Initially, when he's not mature enough, he does not seem to conform to these social expectations, or he does not seem to accept the values of society, and therefore he comes into collision with the society. But as he gains maturity and tries to find out the meaning of life and his own place in society, he gains maturity. It enhances his knowledge. And during his journey, with much difficulty, he gains. It's not that it's not that that the protagonist, while he undergoes several experiences which are not always very pleasant, that it becomes easy for him to gain knowledge or to educate himself. No, rather, it is with much difficulty that he gains maturity, because he has to pass through several hurdles. He encounters several obstacles on his path, and he also encounters failures which finally enlighten him. As I said, that there is always a conflict between the protagonist and the values of society. But as he attains maturity, we find that this conflict diminishes. The Bildungsroman, generally begins with an emotional loss which compels the protagonist to set off on a journey, which means that it is not that all of a sudden, or one fine morning, the protagonist wakes up and sets off on a journey to look for the meaning of life. No, he suffers an emotional loss, and when he suffers an emotional loss, which is portrayed in the very beginning of the novel, it is that very situation that compels him to set off on a journey, because that point he suffers, because at that point he suffers from crisis. And that crisis, that emotional crisis, that emotional loss makes him look for the meaning of life, and therefore he sets off on a journey. As far as these characters are concerned, they are mainly called, coming of age characters, because they come out of they overcome the state of their immaturity and try to attain maturity with the passage of time, having gone through several experiences. So coming of age characters are very relatable. It's quite like when we read a Bildungsroman, we find that we are very easily able to relate with the characters. And it also makes us, the readers, emotionally attached to them, and we also get interested in these characters. Now, why does it so? Why does it happen? It is because we find many things that we are able to, relate to very well, and we find that this character, the kind of experiences that these characters go through, we are able to relate with them very well. So that makes us emotionally attached to them, because maybe we come across an instance related to the protagonist which we have also come across in our life. So it immediately makes us emotionally attached with the characters, to the characters, and we also develop an interest in them. There is a gradual transformation of the protagonist from an inexperienced person to an emotionally mature individual. Naturally, an individual, when he is in his childhood, would naturally fail to have that level of maturity which is expected of a person who has undergone several experiences. So, as we read the novel, we find the protagonist going through several experiences, both pleasant and unpleasant, overcoming several obstacles and hurdles, and encountering failures at the same time. And all these experiences help him in overcoming his immature state. And therefore, he turns out to be later on an emotionally mature individual who has gained much knowledge with the help of his experiences related to life. And when he becomes emotionally mature, it is his education, it is his transformation that finally makes him understand that he should come to a reconciliation with the values of the society in order to be accepted by the society and be a part of that society as well. So finally, when we come to the end of the novel of a Bildungsroman, we find that the protagonist is no longer in collision with the society. He is no longer in conflict with the society. Rather, he is able to come to a reconciliation with the values of the society. Now he has attained that level of maturity which helps him understand properly the values of the society, the values of the very society he lives in. And as a result, he also gets accepted by the society. So all we can say about Bildungsroman is that it depicts or it portrays a character, it portrays the character of an individual who undergoes several experiences, as I said, both pleasant, unpleasant, and it leads to his metamorphosis, a kind of his transformation, where he turns up to be an emotionally mature individual, having much knowledge about life and the several aspects associated with life. And this also helps him to be a part of the society. There are certain things or points that we should remember uh, with regard to Bildungsroman, that this subgenre came into being with the publication of J.W. Goethe's Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. It is with this work by J.W. John Wolfe Goethe that Bildungsroman originated or came into being. So if you look at the timeline, it's 1795 to 96, that is late 18th century. Then Bildungsroman, in one sentence, if we try to describe Bildungsroman in a simple sentence, then we can say it is about the evolution of the protagonist, the transformation, the change. There is also a variation of this genre, which is the Kinselroman, which is another German word for artist's novel. Now, Bildungsroman, as I said, it is the novel of formation, it is the novel of education, it is a coming of age novel. And Kinselroman is another variation of this genre, which is not similar to Bildungsroman, but we can say it is similar in the sense that it is an artist's novel which traces the development of an artist or a writer, or the evolution, let's say the evolution, the transformation of an artist or a writer. So the basic difference between a Bildungsroman and a Kinselroman is that Bildungsroman is about traces the development of an individual, of a normal person, of a normal individual. Whereas Kinselroman deals with the development of an artist or a writer. James Joyce's a Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which was written in 1916, early 20th century, is an example of Kinselroman. So it is also necessary while studying Bildungsroman to remember Kinselroman as well as the example. These are some of the famous novels which belong to this subgenre Bildungsroman. Tom Jones, written in 1749, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, 1847. Tom Jones was written by Henry Fielding. David Copperfield by Dickens, 1850. The Kite Runner in 2003, and Great Expectations in 1861. So these are some of the novels which are known as Bildungsroman. And with this, we come to the discussion or analysis of Bildungsroman as a subgenre of the novel.